Hey everybody out there, welcome back to Horror by the Book with Noel Wing. On today's episode, we're going to look at some of the great horror books of the past and compare them to the movies that followed them. So, we're going to vote on them, at least I'm going to vote on them. You can leave your comments too. So stay tuned. Here we go. Okay, we're back. The first one we're going to discuss is The Shining, written by Mr. Stephen King. Most of you know that story, know the movie. There's quite a few differences in the two, really. One difference is, of course, that there's no bloody elevator in the book. It's not there. You know those bloody twins in the hallway that are in the movie? Not in the book. How about the hedge maze, where Jack Nicholson chases his son around at the end trying to kill him? Or Jack Nicholson's character, John or Jack Torrance. Nah, that's not in the book either. But there are moving animal hedges in the book that kind of come to life. But there's really quite a few discrepancies. The movie, of course, was directed by Stanley Kubrick and also starred Shelley Duvall. It's a horror classic as far as the moviegoers are concerned. I think for the most part, it makes a lot of best of lists. But there's a couple major differences I think really bother Stephen King. The first one was the character of Shelley Duvall in the movie, and how she was a very meek person. In the book, it's exactly opposite. She's a very strong person, the wife of Jack Torrance, and willing to go toe-to-toe with him. A much different personality. And I think Stephen King had issues with the whole aura of the hotel itself and the way Kubrick portrayed it. Some people may think that the Jack Nicholson character was actually going insane on the way up to the hotel to begin with. I didn't really get that. I think that's a bit of a stretch, actually. I don't necessarily believe that at all. But another interesting difference is, of course, the chef that comes back at the end to save the family in the movie runs into Jack Nicholson, who jumps out in a hallway and clubs him with an axe. And that's the end of the chef. But in the book, the chef is a hero, and he does manage to save the family and get them out of there. And of course, in the movie, Jack Nicholson character ends up freezing in the maze. And in the book, he's consumed by a boiler room incident. So, I'm not going to tell you everything in case you haven't actually read the book, The Shining. But as far as giving the nod, I'm going to call it a tie. I'm not going to give the nod to anybody. I think they're both equally good. Remember, Stanley Kubrick was a master filmmaker. Stephen King is a master writer. I think it's okay for them to, or for one of them to take somebody else's work and change it a little bit to adapt it to a better film. So, Stephen King made his own version of The Shining that was more closely related to his book, and it failed miserably, I thought. It wasn't even close to the Kubrick quality. So, anyway, I call out on a tie. I loved them both. Let's go on to the next one. This next book you should have on your shelf if you're a lover of classic literature, and that's Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley, who was a teenager when she wrote it and entered it into a contest. It's an amazing book, and I think it's one of the best classics ever written. And a lot of classics can be hard to read just because of the style of English used. Not Frankenstein. It's not too bad. It's pretty readable by today's standards on the way books are written. So it's really an amazing read. But the biggest issue here is the movies. I mean, the movies portray the Frankenstein monster primarily as a big, lumbering, dumb oaf. Quite different than the book. In the book, the Frankenstein creature, let's talk about the creature here. Sorry, Dr. Frankenstein is the doctor that made the creature. The creature itself in the book is very intelligent. And he's so smart, he causes the doctor a lot of problems. He wants a doctor to make a mate for him. And when the doctor gets into the middle of the process and decides he's going to scrap it because it's a threat to humanity, in some way, the creature confronts him. The creature ends up killing his new wife. The creature ends up, I believe, framing him for a crime that the doctor goes to jail for a bit for. The doctor ends up chasing him across continents. That creature can think, travel, has human feelings. It's an amazing story. And so if you've only seen the movies, Frankenstein, you don't know the story. You really don't know the story. It's much more complex than the movies. And it's an incredible read. It's a book you should have on your shelf. If you haven't read it, you need to. Frankenstein was a fantastically well-written novel. The nod in this one isn't even close. This is a blowout. It goes to the book. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to another classics. This one was written about almost 100 years later than Frankenstein, late 1800s. It's called The Turn of the Screw, written by Henry James. Now, it's a bit tough reading because there's lots of commas in there, and it's written much different than the way a modern author would write today. Henry James was a British man, I believe. But a few years ago, I was at the movies, and I kept seeing this trailer coming out called The Turning, The Turning, The Turning. Oh, it looked good. So I got excited and looked it up. Oh, it's a remake of The Turn of the Screw, which I kind of knew a little bit about anyway. But I got the book and read it. It's a short book. It's the novella, basically. And it's kind of a ghost story. That's the way I read it, anyway. And I get to the movie, right? And there's 2 hours of stuff. They completely change the character of Miss Gross, who's sort of a caretaker of the house and a maid, and change her from a nice lady in the book to almost like a Cruella de Vil model type person in the movie. It was quite different. It wasn't a good, well done part, I think, of that movie. But the really bad movie was the ending. That ending was written by a bunch of intoxicated college kids on a spring break weekend. I mean, if I'm the director of that movie, I'm not putting that on my resume. That had anything to do with that ending. It ended in a 45 or 30 seconds of just chaos that kind of did away with the whole 2 hours you've been watching, almost, the way I took it. And so I thought maybe I was just extra critical. The people I was with, too, didn't understand the ending. So I went online to the movie people, and they agreed the ending was a joke. So this isn't even close. Read the book. It's been made on film before. Right now, streaming on a major network as The Haunting of Bly Manor, which kind of takes off after this book, but a ton of liberties are taken. The movies and the series is confusing. It was done, I think, in the 50s and the 60s again with Lynn Redgrave as the star, then maybe again in the 80s. So it's been done several times. But the book wins. The Turning movie was kind of a joke, frankly. Let's move on. Here I got the DVD instead of the book. And I'm going to tell you why. This is foreshadowing for you literature people. I don't have the book. But I've read the book. I've read Jaws. Peter Benchley, I think it was in mid-70s. Sold, I think, 44 million copies. There was a ton of copies, right? The movie people saw that it was successful, and it became a movie, of course. And when it became a movie, it was the highest earning movie of its time until about 2 years later when some movie came out about lightsabers and talking robots. Of course, I'm talking about Star Wars. But there's some differences between the two. There's an affair in the book between two of the major characters. I won't give it away in case you actually want to read Jaws. That I thought was kind of dumb and didn't add anything to the story, but because there was enough anxiety going around, didn't need that on top of it. In the movie, Quint, is a survivor of the USS Indianapolis, and that classic scene when they're talking in the boat and drinking up. Not in the book at all. And in the movie, also, the mayor's kind of a cheesy guy who's worried about the financials for the summer. Well, in the book, as I recall, he kind of had mafia ties, kind of a rough character. So definitely some differences. And the way the movie ends, I'm not going to tell you, but the shark dies much differently at the end of the book. So Jaws, as far as the movie goes, was one of the best movies of all time. It's one of my favorites. I can't imagine too many movies ever much better than Jaws. So to me, I'm giving a solid win here to the movie. I'm sorry, book lovers. Got to go with the movie on this one. Let's do another one that became a very famous horror movie. How about The Exorcist with Mr. Blatty as the author? That is a great read. This comparison is actually closer than you think. And I find his writing to be quite creative and imaginative. When he died a few years ago, Stephen King gave him a compliment and called that book the greatest horror novel of our time or something like that. I don't remember the exact words. You can look it up if you care. But It was a heck of a good read. And the movie, of course, is a classic. It's constantly in the top 20 of all time. You know, even though its special effects may not fly as well today, and I'm going to discuss that in some other episode why that is. But it was a very, very, very good movie. I mean, it really was. And I thought the book itself had more subplots in it. The book had a description of the priest that I thought was done better in the movie. And the ending of the movie was better than the ending of the book. The book seemed like it hurried through the ending or something. You had all this happen, all of a sudden it was over. So, in comparing, the movie had such impact. I mean, there were people stretched out in long, long lines getting ready to see that, wrapped around the big city blocks, right? And some of these people decided they'd had enough about halfway through in the theater and left. About the time the girl starts vomiting, you know, I think it was green pea soup. By the way, there's a cool documentary on how some of these movies were made, so you should check them out. Jaws and The Shining. But I thought, to me, The Exorcist kind of stands alone. So I'm giving the edge to The Exorcist movie. Although it's closer than you think. The book was darn good, and the book has a great start to it. It really gets you going right away. Talk about some others real quick before I bow out. Misery, Stephen King, movie, book, fantastic. Tie, Kathy Bates, and James Conner in the flick. Given a tie, I thought they were both A's. One movie that was way behind the book was Ghost Story. Ghost Story was written by Peter Straub, and is a fantastic read, really well done, really cool. Man, movie didn't cut it. Another one of those college spring break experiments. And there's others. The Pet Sematary I've talked about, that edition that came out a couple years ago at the theater, had a silly ending and made some major plots in the movie, plot changes for the book that I think Stephen King should be more worried about than what happened in The Shining. Because to me, it seemed quite different than the book to me. More than other horror fans I've talked to who thought it was better than I did. But I'm not going to say it was terrible, but it just lacked a lot compared to the book. The book wins that by a mile. There's lots of others we can talk about. This is just episode 1 of book to movie comparisons of the great works. So there'll be some more coming up. Please comment if there's one you want me to get into and talk. And maybe I've read the book already and can get into it pretty quick. But anyway, thanks for listening. Please comment. Once again, this is Horror by the Book with Noel Wing. I'm out.